The picture is getting clearer. We have a new worldwide ranking system, plus the latest on the semifinal qualifying spots to the CrossFit Games. We have all the details next on Game Central. Hi everybody, and welcome to another edition of Game Central presented by Guaranteed Rate, the official mortgage company of the CrossFit Games. Information about the 2023 season continues to be released, the latest having to do with the worldwide ranking system and the number of qualifying spots that each semifinal will get to the CrossFit Games. Here are the minimum, and I repeat, minimum number of qualifying spots that will be allocated to each semifinal. North America East and West will each get 5. Europe will get 5 as well. Oceania will get 3. South America and Asia will get 2, and Africa will get 1 each for the top man and the top woman. And that leaves 17 qualifying spots for the men's and women's field that will be distributed by the strength of field calculation. More competitive regions will be given additional qualifying spots, and less competitive regions will retain their minimum number of qualifying spots, so no semifinal will lose any of those minimum spots. There are 17 additional spots up for grabs that will be allocated based on strength of field. Now, the men's and women's divisions at each semifinal may be allocated different numbers of those qualifying spots. The final number of qualifying spots to the games for each semifinal will be calculated after the conclusion of quarterfinals. Now, at the close of quarterfinals, the field of each qualifying athletes advancing to the semifinals in each region will be evaluated using their worldwide ranking. Now, this process may show that one region has a highly competitive women's field compared to other regions, resulting in more spots allocated to the women's competition at that semifinal. The men in this field may not be as competitive, resulting in no increase to their minimum number of qualifiers. Now, athletes will know the final number of qualifying spots for the games at their semifinal well before they arrive on site. And for more, here's Tommy Marquez with Competition Director Adrian Bozman.
All right, we're joined now by Adrian Bozman here to talk about the semifinals and the allocated game spots. Adrian, how you doing?
I am good. How are you, Tommy?
I am great. It is a beautiful fall afternoon here. And first things first, how were the semifinal spots, at least the minimum spots, allocated and determined for each semifinal?
That's a good question. We wanted to keep the marquee events in North America and Europe that we'll be running this year with a premium number of spots. So we gave them the top 5. And then the other regions we wanted to keep the same as they have been to reflect the geographic regions that are a little bit more far-flung and in some cases still developing as far as the sport. We didn't want those regions to lose any spots. So if you're playing along at home, it's fewer minimum spots than have been allocated previously for North America and Europe. However, the allocation of spots due to strength of field will more than likely be reallocated there after we finish that calculation. So because of the density of competition there, those minimums are likely to bump up in those regions.
That leads me right to my next question. There's 17 additional spots up for grabs. Can you maybe dive in a little bit deeper and clarify how those spots will be allocated between men and women?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things to note there that are really important for competitors and fans alike. Number one, men's and women's divisions are going to be calculated separately. So it's very possible that in some regions, you'll have, for example, a less competitive men's field, and they may not earn any more spots than the minimum that's allocated to them. However, you might have in that same region a really competitive women's field, and they do earn more spots. So those will be taken into consideration independently, which is really cool. And it'll be fun to see how that plays out. But for both divisions, what's going to happen is after the end of quarterfinals, the rankings of all of the athletes in that competitive field will be considered and then stacked against all of the competitive fields from the rest of the world. And based on that, we'll have a pretty good sense of where the most competitive density is. Therefore, we can start allocating spots accordingly. So the details of how we're going to calculate that, we're not ready to be public with quite yet. We're still arguing a little bit internally about the best model. And we want to make sure that we have that rock solid before we start putting that out publicly. But before the beginning of the Open, you guys can expect more information about that calculation.
And speaking of models, people who are following at home might note another significant change as far as the season structure is concerned. Why is this the right system for the CrossFit Games in the sport at this point in time?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think this year it's really exciting because we can do two things. Number one, we can really take a look under the hood and say, hey, where are the most competitive regions? Who is deserving of more spots to the games? We've heard it from fans around the world in certain regions. I mean, it's no surprise that the fans, particularly in places like Australia, have been saying for years, hey, we don't have the population necessarily to compete with larger regions, but our competitive density definitely means that we need more spots. Well, let's see if that's actually the case. So we'll be able to do that this season, which is cool. On the other hand, we have those minimums that won't go down. So every region does have a guaranteed number of people that will represent from that region. So for areas that are still developing and they may not have that competitive density, we still get to highlight some of their national heroes and people from that region that can help to drive interest in the sport locally. So in my opinion, I think we're getting a nice balance between the absolute highest level of competition and a geographic representation that helps to grow the sport globally. So it's exciting.
And a great opportunity to earn more spots through fitness on the field of play. I think
exactly.
Everybody can be excited about that. Boss, thanks so much again for taking the time to chat and providing some further clarification on that.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tommy.
Big thanks to Adrian Bozman for taking the time to join us. Now, the next big piece of information that has been released has to do with the worldwide ranking system and how that will be used to determine the number of qualifying spots available at semifinals in 2023. This system is similar to both professional tennis and professional golf ranking systems. An athlete earns points based on their performance during the CrossFit Games season. Now, the previous 2 years of an athlete's performance in the Open, quarterfinals, semifinals, and games will be used to calculate their ranking. Placing higher in these stages and advancing further in the season will earn them more points. This ranking system can also benefit our athletes in terms of professional opportunities available to them. Athletes will be able to use their rank as an objective view of their marketability for sponsors. This system will provide sponsors with objective measurements when choosing athletes. This will allow the sponsor to make decisions based on competitive performance over multiple years. Now, this is a big step in our continued professionalization of our sport. Another way we can use an athlete's rank would be for future invitational style competitions. Now, this system can look at multiple years of data when determining a roster versus just how an athlete ranked in their last competition. Cumulative data on athletic performance can lead to a more exciting competition in general. The old adage, you're only as good as your last win, isn't applicable in the scenario of live athletic competition. I was able to speak with one of the men who is responsible for coming up with this system, Senior Manager of the Competition Team, Dave Eubanks. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. Other sports have used a system like the one that you were able to help craft for the upcoming season. When did the idea for this start?
Oh man, well, I think, you probably heard some rumblings about stuff like this in our community for years. And it's frankly just something that we never really had sort of the time or resources to devote to it. But it really began in earnest kind of midway through this past season, where the task kind of fell down to my lap and a group of us that have been kind of working on this since then. And so since about, this spring, this last year, we've been crafting this to put it together.
How will this worldwide ranking system be implemented in 2023?
Yeah, so really what we're doing is we're taking the past 2 years of competitors, kind of results, which means their Open, quarterfinals, semifinals, and game results. And we're throwing those into kind of some point systems where a certain amount of points will be awarded based on your placement in the Open, quarters, semis, and games. And then when athletes get to semifinals for 23, for example, the Open from 21 and the quarters from 21 will have fallen off their points. And the new 23 Open and quarters will be on their points. And so we'll be able to take the fields of athletes that are at each individual quarterfinal, look at their specific points, and then based on those, compare them against each other, and then allocate the spots that we have for the strength of field.
How will this ranking system not only benefit the professional CrossFitters, but also just the everyday athletes?
Yeah, so that's one of the cool things about this is that for sure on our kind of first version, we are absolutely pointing this at the top level athletes, but the system that we're designing is with the intent of being able to roll it out eventually so that basically everybody that participates in the Open will be accruing some points based on how they do with that. And then if they don't progress beyond that, great, they'll still have some points from that might be used for other systems in the future. But all that stuff is kind of TBD. Right now, it's just, big time athletes, kind of the pros and the semifinal levels, but eventually we hope to be able to use this for everybody.
Dave, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for taking the time and really looking forward to seeing how this plays out in 2023.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Big thanks to Dave Eubanks for taking the time out of his schedule to talk with us about that worldwide ranking system. And thanks to you for watching this edition of Game Central presented by Guaranteed Rate, the official mortgage company of the CrossFit Games. And if you have not already, be sure to check out every single episode of Miles to Madison available now on the CrossFit Games YouTube channel. I'm Sean Woodland. Thanks so much for watching, and we will talk to you next time.